off the east coast of the United States. And this was just an indication of the mission success. Even though it was launched out of Wallops, we operated this out of the MMOC, which is the Multi-Mission Operations Center at NASA Ames Research Center. And I indicated earlier or stated it impacted on the far side of the moon on April 17th of last year. One of the things we're investigating or exploring at NASA Ames is trying to develop a common spacecraft bus so they can make these easier to fly in the future, even though CubeSats, of course, provide a commonality already. In some cases, there will be spacecraft that we will build that CubeSats may not be large enough or may not have the power, propulsion, or comm to satisfy the mission that we envision, even though we're trying to do things to improve the capabilities of CubeSats in those areas. Resource Prospector. This is something that we consider to be sort of a follow-on to LCROSS. This is a rover that's going to potentially launch around 2020, and it's going to investigate more of the extent of water and other volatiles on the surface of the moon. And we are into phase A right now, which is called the formulation for the mission. We still have some design reviews that are coming up in the next year or so before it launches later this decade. Now I want to really get into what small sats are doing and what's becoming of them. And you can see this cover from Aviation Week in Space Technology from 2012, when it says small satellites doing more with less. That was an interesting title for the magazine at the time, and actually what we want to do is we want to do more with these spacecraft, even though we want to maintain their small size, but we also want to get more for return on investment. We want to save money, and that's the biggest objective that we have in trying to improve the sophistication and capabilities of these systems. So let's talk about CubeSats, or nanosats, if you will. You already had somebody here from Cal Poly, and they started some time ago as a teaching tool. As a matter of fact, in many cases, a lot of people still scoff at these things as toys, and we have the mantra of saying, well, some people may think of them as that. We like to think of them as toys to tools. And you can see the mass regime and size regime that's indicated on this, whether it's a 1U, 3U, or 6U. And this is our objective at NASA Ames, is to get a return on investment that is of high value proposition. Do mission concepts from 18 to 24 months from the time you visualize the mission until the time you launch it and start operating it. I wanted to go over some of the NASA Ames nanosat missions, and you can see some of the focus areas that we have. Space biology science is one, technology demonstrations is another, and investigating things like intra-descent and landing and downmast investigations as well. We would like to achieve peer-reviewed science with nanosat missions. We also we have deployed the first NASA's 1U and 3U nanosats from the ISS, and we'll be deploying the first nanosat swarms in space in the near future. And we'll be developing the first beyond LEO bio-nanosat that is referred to as BioSentinel. As you may recall, the last time we sent a biology beyond low Earth orbit was in 1972 with the last Apollo mission. Of course, we have astronauts in the ISS today, and we've had space shuttles before they were retired, and Soyuz programs going up to LEO, but we haven't had a biology from the human race beyond LEO since 1972, and I'll talk about BioSentinel with regard to that momentarily. Here are the nanosat missions and the timelines that we have flown. I'll talk about some of these in the upcoming charts, but you see some of the first ones we flew out of NASA Ames back in 2006, all the way up through many that we have controlled and operated up through today, and some of the ones that are coming up actually this year in the very near future. Pete Worden wanted me to emphasize the bottom bullet that NASA Ames is the leading agency in CubeSats within NASA, and we consider the ISS a critical deployment platform. And now that I mentioned Pete Worden's name, some of you may have heard he's already announced his retirement from NASA effective the 31st of this month. Okay, space biology is one of the focus areas that I mentioned. And this is looking at the testing of life in space. We eventually do want to send astronauts to Mars, and one of the things we want to understand is the long-term impact of radiation on biology. And we have used systems like PharmaSat, OREOS, Spore-1Sat, or SporeSat-1 and SporeSat-2, ECAMSat, which indicates there that it's supposed to have launched in spring 2015, that is delayed, not because of the nanosat itself, it's because of the launch vehicle that it is tied to. They are having a delay because of the primary payload that's going up on that particular launch. And then BioSentinel, which is in formulation today at NASA Ames, and we're looking at a fall 2018 launch as a payload, as a secondary payload on the first SLS system that's going to go up in that year. These are the BioSentinel deep space nanospacecraft objectives. And this, if you haven't heard, SLS, when it goes up, is going to do a translunar orbit. It's going to go out beyond the moon, then turn around and come back, and we're going to drop off some payloads when we do return. I mentioned earlier, this is the first biological study beyond LEO in over 40 years. And you can see that we're using some DNA double-strand break frequencies to calibrate radiation damage in space. We want to validate some biological radiation damage models as well and demonstrate the actual science concept. There are a number of payload sensors that will go up on board this, and it's right now we're still on schedule for an early 2018 launch. TechEd Sats are re-entry technology demonstrations. Marcus Murdoch, who's at NASA Ames, has been working on these quite a bit, is to look at ways that we can safely return some things from the International Space Station or from low Earth orbit without depending upon Dragon or other capsules that go up and resupply the ISS and then wait on their return to bring some of the payload or some of the experiments back. This is a picture of the TechEd Sat 3P deployment images. And here are some information on PhoneSats. Some of you may have heard of these. We had a challenge at NASA Ames to some young engineers. Take the Android processor out of some of your cell phones and see if you can build a spacecraft of them. And obviously, they've been successful in doing that. There have been a number of these that's already been launched, and a number of them are successful. PhoneSat-1 was the first phone-based, if you will, spacecraft, and it was launched back in early 2013. There have been some subsequent PhoneSats that came after that. And then Edison, which is we consider the first nanosat swarm, is going to be launching sometime later this year, we hope. This is some information on Edison, the first nanosat swarm. Some people consider this the first true swarm in space, and it's configured to allow spacecraft to talk to each other and share data while taking geographically dispersed payload measurements. But the concept works in this manner. Only one spacecraft talks to the ground at a time. It is, if you will, the captain. It queries others. It talks to the others. It gets their information back and then radios the information of the swarm to the ground. And there's a lovely picture of them. They're sitting on a shelf now waiting for launch. Here's some information for the nanosat spacecraft buses, from the SporeSat bus, the Edison Nose bus, and the BioSentinel bus. There's a bit of information on here, and I will leave this with you for the record so that you can see the kind of things that we were using for power, payload volumes, payload masses, what altitudes we're launching at, the duration of the missions, and any other information you'd like that you want to understand what we're trying to do with some of the nanosat missions that we are flying and will fly in the future. As a final summary, NASA Ames, in many cases, we consider ourselves to be the lead center for NASA for small spacecraft and nanosatellite and CubeSat missions. You may have heard that there's money in the budget this year for a NASA mission to Europa. And of course, there will be a large spacecraft that will go along to conduct a mission, but NASA Ames has been assigned as the agency or the center for NASA that will be responsible for the secondaries for that mission. And we anticipate there will be, in some ways, a derivative of nanosats or small sats. That is not going to be an easy mission to accomplish for several reasons, one of which is going to be the radiation environment that we will face. And so there are some interesting things that we will have to investigate over the coming years as far as improving the capability of nanosats that could be used as secondaries or payloads on larger spacecraft. And we do, I want to emphasize the last bullet on here, we do like to actively partner with universities, international space agencies, and other government agencies on small and nanosat missions. And I'll end there and see if you have any questions. Oh.
Thank you, Roger. Yes. Yes. We can open for any question if you have to Jan and to Rogers, and then we'll continue the presentation with Piero GALEONE from ESA. But firstly, yes. Questions? Yes, please.
My question is about cross-satellite links. You brought up two examples that no one's really discussed yet. The question is about cross-satellite links that there's the use of the Iridium modems where you have a system talking to an already existing system that's originally designed for mobile satellite service to terrestrial receivers now being used in space. And you're also talking about the swarm UHF crosslink, so it's the same network talking to each other. So that's also something that I think should be on people's attention when they're thinking about spectrum usage for these nanosatellites. That I think there's a lot of valuable potential there, but there hasn't been a lot of discussion on it, the validity and long-term prospects of which frequencies to use and under what provisions and things like that. Which service?
It seemed like more of a statement than a question, but yeah. Yes, as a matter of fact, in some ways we're also looking at conducting some experiments in the future using Iridium or Globalstar or some other communication systems. There has to be a consideration of flexibility. And the first swarm we're using, of course, is UHF. And that's what we're pursuing. Thank you. That's what we're pursuing initially, is just, for this first demonstration, is just UHF. But we're also looking at other frequencies for future nanosat constellations, if you will.
So thank you again. Thanks again, Roger, for those presentation of the current NASA Ames program. And maybe I'll call now Piero GALEONE from ESA. And okay, you can stay. We can get there. That will make a presentation about the ESA Small Satellite Program.
Can you put your presentation? Yes. Do you need some slides to be presented as well? Yes, the presentation is here. Okay. Thank you very much. So, my name is Piero GALEONE. I am the head of the university projects of the ESA Education Office. I'm sorry, it's not working. Okay. You have to speak closer. Okay, I will speak closer. Thank you. So in my presentation, I will quickly introduce the Education Office, what we do at the Tertiary, at the Tertiary Education Unit, where we deal with the university projects. Then I will focus a little bit more on our Fly Your Satellite program for CubeSats, and I will address the approach that we have undertaken for the CubeSat teams which are participating in our program concerning the subjects of frequency and the space objects registration. So the ESA Education and Knowledge Management Office is engaged in a number of activities.